Good morning, boys and girls. My name is Judy, and this morning I'd like to read to you a story that was told hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before television or radio or videos, and it was written down for the very first time about 300 years ago. So today I'd like to read this story to you, and I'd like your minds to create the pictures of the story as I read it. The name of the story is Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village near the forest. Whenever she went out, the little girl wore a red riding cloak. So everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood asked her mother if she could go to visit her grandmother, as it had been a while since they'd seen each other. "That's a very good idea," her mother said. So they packed a nice basket for Little Red Riding Hood to take to her grandmother. When the basket was ready, the little girl put on her red cloak and kissed her mother goodbye. "Remember, go straight to Grandma's house," her mother cautioned. "Don't daddle along the way, and please, don't talk to strangers. The woods are dangerous." "Don't worry, Mommy," said Little Red Riding Hood. "I'll be very careful." But when Little Red Riding Hood noticed some lovely flowers in the forest, she forgot her promise to her mother. She picked a few flowers, watched the butterflies flit about for a while, listened to the frogs croaking, and then she picked a few more flowers. Little Red Riding Hood was enjoying the warm summer day so much that she didn't notice a dark shadow approaching out of the forest behind her. Suddenly, the wolf appeared. "What are you doing out here, little girl?" the wolf said in a voice as friendly as he could muster. "I'm on my way to see my grandma, who lives through the forest near the brook," said Little Red Riding Hood. And then she realized how late she was, and she quickly excused herself and rushed down the path to her grandma's house. The wolf, in the meantime, took a shortcut. The wolf, a little bit out of breath from running, arrived at Grandma's and knocked at the door. "Oh, thank goodness, dear. Come in, come in. I was worried sick that something bad had happened to you in the forest," said Grandma, thinking that the knock was her granddaughter. The wolf let himself in. Poor Granny did not have time to say another word before the wolf gobbled her up. The wolf let out a satisfied burp and then poked through Granny's wardrobe to find a nightgown that he liked. He added a frilly little sleeping cap, and for good measure, he dabbed some perfume of Granny's behind his pointy ears. A few minutes later, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf jumped into bed and pulled the covers up over his nose. "Who is it?" he said in a crackly voice. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood." "Oh, how lovely! Do come in, my dear," croaked the wolf. When Little Red Riding Hood entered the little cottage, she could scarcely recognize her grandmother. "Grandmother, your voice sounds so odd. Is something the matter?" she asked. "Oh, I just have a touch of a cold," squeaked the wolf, adding a cough at the end to prove the point. "But grandmother, what big ears you have," said Little Red Riding Hood as she edged closer to the bed. "The better to hear you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have," said Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to see you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "But grandmother, what big teeth you have," said Little Red Riding Hood, her voice quivering just a little bit. "The better to eat you with," roared the wolf, and he leaped out of bed and began to chase the little girl. Almost too late, Little Red Riding Hood realized that the person in the bed was not her grandmother, but a hungry wolf, and she ran across the room and through the door, shouting, "Help, wolf!" as loudly as she could. A woodsman who was chopping logs nearby heard her cry and ran toward the cottage as fast as he could. He grabbed the wolf and made him spit out the poor grandmother, who was a bit frazzled by the whole experience, but was still in one piece. "Oh, Grandma, I was so scared," sobbed Little Red Riding Hood. "I will never speak to strangers or dawdle in the forest again." "Oh, there, child. You've learned an important lesson. Thank goodness you shouted loud enough for this kind woodsman to hear you." The woodsman knocked out the wolf and carried him deep in the forest where he wouldn't bother any other people any longer. And Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother had a very nice lunch and a long, long chat. The end. And I've given your teacher some ideas that you can spend time with to finish this story. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.